Hey everybody, it's Roger King. Welcome to July 5th, 2023. Today we are going to review every beginner's dream of understanding and every experienced real estate investor's bag of tricks. And we're going to review 15 of our escape clause catalog. So stick with us. Well, thanks again for joining. Please hit subscribe below. We're going to keep throwing out content every day as much as we can. There's a lot of stuff I've still got going on. I'm still a very active real estate investor, but I want to give you guys a lot of information, and I want to also provide you guys a ton of value. So hit subscribe. Thanks. So today we're really going to jump into what beginning investors are going to look at as sort of the safety net, if you will. People that have not bought property or haven't bought many properties don't understand that there is always some way to get out of a purchase and sale agreement if certain contingencies are not met. And when I think about what I was doing early on in my career, starting in 1996, I was going through a lot of uncertainty because I didn't know how, if I was going to put $10,000 or $20,000 down on a property, what happens if the property stinks? What happens if there's a problem with the foundation? Or what if there's a problem with the roof and I didn't have enough money in my budget for a roof? And so I wanted to find out what are the ways that I could say, you know what, I appreciate you going into contract with me, but I'm not going to be able to close on this property. It's a fair question. It's a fair proposition as a buyer to a seller. And also you need to be aware of what are the contingencies for you as a seller to the buyer. So what I've done is I've thought about a bunch of different escape clauses that we've used in the past. Again, 27 years now? I think it's 27 years since I first started investing in real estate. And I'm going to go through in actually no particular order. But I think that, the rookies and the rock stars alike, they all use some or all of these contingencies, depending on what's going on with the specific property. If it's a single family home, you don't necessarily need an environmental report like you would with a multifamily. You don't need to make sure that there's a whole host of things that you need to make sure of with the land and with the zoning. You don't need to learn you don't need to know some of those things. So I just want to talk about what I've listed here is about 15 different contingencies. So let's jump in and go through this list again in no particular order. And I'm going to describe in detail, a little bit of detail, what all of these are. And we'll start off with number one, the financing contingency. And what the financing contingency really does is it says, look, if I'm unable to get a loan for this particular property, we're out of contract. Pretty self-explanatory. If you've got any questions, by the way, about any of these, put them down below in the questions and I'm happy to answer. So the second one is the inspection contingency. So this is a really broad contingency that we use in every property that we get into. And that basically says if there's something in the inspection that I don't like, I can back out of this contract to purchase. Now, we do put a time frame on that. And normally on a single family house or a small multifamily house, you've got maybe 17 days, like California is 17 days typically inspection to do all of your due diligence on that and then get through the, you've got to sign off on the contingency, that specific contingency, and then you're going to just you've said, I've inspected it. I agree that everything is what we've said, and there you move forward. But I like to have that inspection contingency in there in case there's something I discover and I don't want to buy the property anymore. The next one up is the title contingency. And what happens is we open escrow, we get into a contract, we open escrow, and in that contract for sale, purchase sale agreement, it says, look, if the title isn't clean, or if there's something on the title that cannot get resolved so that I get clean title, we're not going to be able to move forward with this purchase. So you're going to get a title report. It's going to show the liens, who's owned the property in the past, if there's any other encumbrances or if there's any easements or anything like that. It's all going to show up on this title report. And if you don't like anything, you can back out of the contract. The next one up is the appraisal contingency. And it's interesting because some people won't allow you to submit an offer if you have an appraisal contingency, which ties back to the financing contingency. But with the appraisal contingency, you're saying, look, if this Mr. Seller, you're saying that this property is worth $2 million, and I'm okay buying it at $2 million as long as the appraisal comes into the actual amount of $2 million. If it comes in at $1.5 million, I'm allowed to back out. If it comes in at 1.95, I'm allowed to back out. So that's an appraisal contingency. The next one up is the seller's failure to disclose contingency. And what's really super interesting about that is the seller has to perform in your due diligence search on what's going on the property. If you can get this in the agreement, which most agreements, certainly homes, single-family homes and multifamily, they all have this disclosure contingency, and it says that the seller is disclosing all the problems with the property. And they understand that there's some weird thing going on with the lot line, which we just encountered, which we didn't know about. Or if there's a problem with a tax lien that they don't disclose to you, which is typically found in the title contingency. Hopefully you're getting a title search and a title report. But there's also contamination failure to disclose. So I think that these are some things that we need to really prepare the seller to disclose. And if they fail to disclose, we then get to back out of the contract when we discover that information. The next one up is the property insurance contingency, which is a really interesting one. And I think it might start to get a lot of traction these days. What the property insurance contingency basically suggests is that if there's a problem obtaining property insurance at a reasonable rate, then you can back out of the contract. And when I say a reasonable rate, I think a way to determine if it's reasonable is by taking what the current property insurance rate is, and let's for fun just say it's $1,000 a year on a single family home. So it's $100 a month or $85 a month or whatever the math is. That's what the current owner is paying. But if you have to pay $4,000 a year property insurance, you've gotten 4 or 5 quotes, and the new insurance is going to be at $4,000, that makes this property maybe even not profitable, certainly less profitable, but maybe even no profit. So if you get a rate that comes back insanely high, and in Florida this is happening, you're going to see that it's not a smart choice to continue to buy this property. So we have a way to back out of this property with this property insurance contingency. We also are going to have an environmental contingency. Now, this is for bigger properties such as larger multifamily, commercial, industrial for sure. It's also for mobile home parks. And we've also got, anything that's bigger than a fourplex in any other form of real estate, except maybe for raw land. But even if it's raw land, you may want to check it out based on where it's located and if there's any contamination. What it says is you're going to get normally a phase 1 environmental report. And that environmental report does a very cursory overview inspection of the property and if there's any contamination of any kind or any potential contamination of any kind. So if it's clean on that report, the phase one, most banks will loan on it and they'll close on it. And then if there's some problem with it, and there seems to be some environmental concern, then they will obtain a phase two report, and they're going to go into some greater detail on what that is. So if the environmental phase one doesn't come back clean and you have to go to a phase two, that may be right there a grounds for removing yourself from this purchase and sale. And is certainly if a phase two shows that there's major environmental concerns, you're going to want to step back, reevaluate what the remediation is, how difficult it is, how time consuming. Can you be up and running while you're doing the remediation? You've got a whole host of calculations, but at least it allows you to say, you know what, thank you, no thank you, or we're going to walk away. So the next one up is the condominium or the HOA contingency. And specifically for condominiums and the HOAs, you want to make sure that that the condominium association has enough capital in their accounts right now for any ongoing repairs and maintenance, their upkeep of the property, landscaping, the normal landscaping, but they also need to have a contingency fund for if a water line breaks or if there's a storm and there's flooding or they have to buy a new piece of equipment such as a generator. Here in Puerto Rico, my HOA, the Condo Association, they have a big generator. So in case the power goes out, the property has enough power to run the property. And I think it's important to also make sure of when you're doing this assessment, your due diligence process, does the HOA, the condominium association, are they going to do any sort of assessments in the near future? Has anything been proposed by the condo association within the last 6 months to replace 20 new roofs? If you've got 20 buildings and they need 20 new roofs, how much is that per unit? Is it $5,000 or is it $50,000? If you buy it, you have to now pay that assessment. So somebody might be selling their condo knowing that there's an assessment coming up and they can't afford it. So you're going to need to calculate that in, or this may be a reason for you to walk away from the property. The next one up is a zoning contingency. And basically that just says, look, I know that this is a single family house, but it's on 35 acres in East Tennessee. Is it zoned and I'm able to own a property on this particular property? Is it zoned correctly? Or can I build something down the road on this vacant land? So it's currently agriculture and I want to build 35 units. Can I do that? And so what the zoning contingency basically says is you're going to be able to go to the zoning, get an idea of if you have the ability to change the zoning from agriculture over to, maybe mixed family or light industrial or farm or whatever it is, you want to change it from to something different. Can you get that done? And if you can't, then you can back out of this contract because you know that the zoning contingency is in there. I think that's a really good clause to pay attention to. It's not normally something that anybody needs to really consider and think about if they're just buying single family homes for any of the various types of real estate investment methodologies or business models you may come to. But if you're buying land or other types of properties, you may want to change the zoning. This is definitely something you need to include in your purchase and sale agreement. The next one would be permit and code compliant contingency, which is, what does that mean? Well, one of those things is when you're buying a piece of property that's already been in existence for a long time, you're going to come across properties that people have added on and have not gotten a permit when they've done the add-on. So the property may show up in the county records as a 1,200 square foot single family, 3 bedroom, 2 bath with a 1 car garage, but they've actually, over the course of the last 15 years, they've made it a 2 car garage, or maybe they've taken the garage off completely and turned that into a bedroom. Maybe they've added on to the back of the house another 3,000 square feet because they live on an acre and the guy's in construction and nobody ever drove by the property from the county and said, hey, what's this construction going on? So they've snuck it in the back door. So if you're trying to buy this property that has not been permitted and it's not code compliant, you have now the ability to back off from the purchase and sale closing because you want to protect your interests. Because if you're going to have to go through a long, involved process to get this permit and code compliance up to date, it may not be worth your time and your effort. It might, but it may not. So we're just going to add this contingency to allow you to back away from it. And I think it's going to be helpful just to know that it's in your back pocket, not necessarily that it's a deal killer, but it could be if you want it to be. Okay, so here is the financing rate contingency, which I guess should have been included earlier, but we have a really interesting lending environment right now. And rates are changing quite a bit. They're going high. Sometimes they're dropping back. They're going high again. Sometimes they're dropping back. And one of the things that I think is really super important is the idea that if you can lock in an interest rate early and you're going to be able to get through the escrow, I think it's smart to know where you can stand when you get into this purchase sale agreement. The challenge, obviously, is that a lot of times it takes us a few weeks to get from the purchase and sale agreement into a locked in rate with the lender, certainly on commercial property. So I would urge you to have a financing rate contingency on certain things certain properties that may be tricky, such as a larger property, some commercial property for sure, and just say, look, this project doesn't work if we're doing 7.5%, but it works at nothing higher than 6.85. So if it's 6.85 and lower, I know it's going to work. So therefore, I'm going to put a contingency in there that says, I will buy this property. This isn't the language we're really going to use. I'm just giving a basic example. I'm going to buy this property if my loan rate can be under 6.85%, maybe a 25-year adjustable rate in 7 years. However you want to define that. If it can't be 6.85, then I have the option to back away from this property. Again, it's a contingency. It's not an actual poison pill, okay? And which is a whole other series that we'll talk about later. So I want to make sure that this financing rate contingency is really included in some of these larger projects you're either considering or doing, or if you're a passive investor and you're thinking about putting 50 or 100,000 or more into somebody else's project, and you're wiring them money, which I wouldn't do, watch one of the last videos. If you're about to do this, make sure that there's some contingency in there, whether it's a financing contingency or a due diligence contingency, that allows you to get your money back if the interest rate is too high. Because if that interest rate is too high and you're just sort of a passive investor along for the ride as a limited partner, you may not see any of the returns you've been promised or were projected in the pro forma. So I would urge you to really sort of understand what lending environment problems you may face as a limited partner. Okay, so the next contingency is for the sale of the buyer's property. And this is a really interesting one. And that says, hey, Mr. Seller, I am interested in buying your property, but it's only on the condition that the current property I own actually sells. Now, some people will have a problem with that, and some people will have some kickback on that. But I do think that if you are moving from let's just say your primary residence in Tennessee and you're moving to Arizona, you want to make sure that you have some variation on, you know, some of these problems that people face. Because if the property in Tennessee doesn't sell and you're trying to get to Arizona and you can't close on the Arizona house until you've gotten all of your equity, you need to make sure that they know that as well, because maybe the house is in perfect condition. Maybe the house is there's no problems with any of the seller disclosures. Maybe the financing contingency is okay. Maybe everything else looks fantastic. But you have to make sure that you can sell your house prior to buying the other one. And hey, if you've been paying attention for the last couple weeks here, I had another video a little while ago. We were talking about a buyer for our mobile home park out in Oklahoma. He was trying to refinance something. He could have put a clause in our purchase and sale agreement back in January that said, hey, this is, contingent upon my ability to refinance the loan and get $500,000, which he didn't do. And so he couldn't buy our property like he'd promised to, like we were in escrow for 5 months. And so, there's a whole host of reasons why this would be certainly for your primary residence, but also maybe your commercial property. If you're going to do a 1031 exchange, you're just trying to switch properties, I think that those are all really super great reasons. Okay, so the next one is the force majeure clause. And really what I would say is that it really has, it's a weird word, majeure, but basically it's this overarching view of, in light of unforeseen circumstances or events beyond either party's control, including acts of God, that both parties have the ability to cancel this contract. And I think that most contracts these days have this clause already built in. And I do think that if you're writing a contract through a lawyer or through some sort of an advisor, that is a fairly boilerplate clause. And I think it's important because, we're buying mobile home parks. And let's say, sadly, if a tornado were to tear down the majority of that park, I don't want to buy it for the obvious reasons, and certainly not at that price. So if we just decide to walk away because the major damage that's been done by this tornado, even if it's the day before closing, then we have the ability and the right to walk away. And the same holds true with the seller. The seller can also say, look, there's something going on that I didn't know about in my review of my due diligence, and I discovered that there was some problem with the stream running through the property, and there was some petrochemical plant coming by down the stream, and they were dumping water into that. I don't want to pass that off onto you, and then in a year get sued by you in order to recoup your costs for buying my property. So I think that, when you find out these things, look, it's a problem that is beyond any party's control here, and we both agreed just to walk away. And then, of course, the final and probably most common clause, I would say, is the escrow or earnest money deposit clause. And basically what the earnest money deposit return clause says is that, hey, we know we're not going to go into escrow. We want our deposit returned, and you have to provide that to us in a certain number of days. And I think that those are the things that most real estate investors have heard about. If we put the money up and then we get rid of, one of the reasons we've just gone over, we're still going to get our earnest money deposit, which helps us reduce our costs of investing and reduce our risk on, sizable earnest money deposits, because one or more of these determinate contingencies is requiring us to back out of the contract. And so we also want to make sure that we get our earnest money returned to us within a matter of days, not weeks, months, or certainly not years. So I think that this 15 list of your escape clause catalog is going to be a really important set of tools for you to use. I'm going to actually put the list down below so that you can understand what they are. I'm going to go into some greater detail as well to help you understand if you just need a little glossary of what they are. I think it's a really helpful set of tools. I've used many of these over the years, and I hope you guys get a lot of benefit. It's really a matter of safety first for all of us as we're real estate investors, because we want to make sure that we don't lose money. I love Warren Buffett's quote, rule number one in investing is don't lose money. Rule number two is look at rule number one. So what are the ways that we can reduce our losses? And when we're just getting into real estate investing, these tools help you feel, okay, I'm safe. I can sleep at night knowing that there are enough things that I've built into my purchase and sale agreement that I can walk away and get all my money back. So I hope, again, that this has been helpful. I know this is kind of a long one. Please hit subscribe. We've got many, many more of these coming up. I'm going to be teaching some of these things. I'm going to be giving some of my philosophy on these things, and I hope that this is helpful. If you have any questions, do not hesitate. Post your questions below, and I will jump in as soon as I see them.